It began like a whisper in the halls of power, a secret no one wanted to say out loud. Canada, a nation long tied to American defense industries, quietly started exploring an alternative. While everyone expected Canada to continue its path toward the F-35, something unexpected happened. Sweden's Gripen entered the conversation. At first, it seemed laughable. How could a jet designed by a small neutral country possibly stand against the mighty Lockheed Martin F-35, the trillion-dollar stealth fighter project? But behind closed doors, analysts uncovered disturbing truths. The F-35 was expensive, fragile, and dependent on a logistical web controlled by the US. Any malfunction meant waiting weeks for repairs and paying astronomical sums. Canadian defense planners realized that choosing the F-35 wasn't about independence. It was about surrendering to American control forever. The Gripen, however, was different. It was cheap, reliable, and built for nations that valued sovereignty. Unlike the F-35, it could take off from highways, refuel quickly, and be repaired with simple tools. The secret spread among Canadian officials like wildfire. Reports compared the lifetime cost of 88 F-35s with what Gripen could offer, and the results shocked them. Billions of dollars could be saved. Suddenly, the Gripen wasn't just a competitor. It was a potential weapon against the dominance of the F-35 program. What started as whispers began to feel like treason against the US defense machine. Canadian military insiders began to notice something strange. Lobbyists, politicians, even foreign voices started pressuring them, urging that the F-35 was the only choice. But the more Canada studied the Gripen, the more dangerous the truth became. If a NATO country like Canada chose the Gripen, the ripple effect could shatter the monopoly of the F-35. And somewhere deep inside, decision-makers realized this wasn't just about jets. It was about power, control, and the future of global defense. The first crack in the wall had appeared, and the world was not ready for what came next. The moment the first whispers escaped into the open, the atmosphere inside Ottawa shifted. Meetings grew tense, documents were marked confidential, and officials began moving with the unease of people carrying secrets too heavy to reveal. The Americans knew something was wrong. Washington sent quiet delegations, urging Canadian decision-makers to stay the course. Behind polite smiles, veiled threats lurked. Billions in trade, intelligence cooperation, and even diplomatic ties seemed to hang in the balance. But the Canadians had seen the numbers. They couldn't ignore them anymore. The Gripen was cheaper, not just in purchase, but in the long, grueling decades of upkeep. Where the F-35 drained budgets with maintenance contracts and software locks, the Gripen offered freedom. Canada could modify it, update it, even build parts domestically. No hidden strings, no endless bills. It was the kind of sovereignty every middle power dreamed of, but rarely dared to take. Inside NATO, whispering whispers grew louder. If Canada, a founding member, defected from the F-35 program, what would stop others? Countries already frustrated by delays and costs might follow. Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, nations quietly drowning in expenses, might see Canada as proof that rebellion was possible. Washington understood this. If Canada turned toward Sweden, the F-35's image as the inevitable choice could shatter overnight. That's when the pushback intensified. Lobbyists swarmed Ottawa, Retired generals appeared on television praising the F-35 and painting the Gripen as outdated. Think tanks suddenly published reports warning that Canada would risk its security by choosing Sweden. It was psychological warfare, waged in boardrooms and media headlines. Yet beneath the noise, Canadian pilots were whispering their own truths. In simulation after simulation, the Gripen shocked them. Its agility, its electronic warfare systems, its ability to adapt. It wasn't just holding its own against the F-35. It was outmaneuvering it in certain scenarios. By now, Canada's quiet exploration of the Gripen was no longer a hidden rumor. It had become a storm. Strange incidents began to unfold. Classified documents vanished without explanation. Officials complained of strange clicks on their phone lines, and some swore they were being followed at night. The message was clear. Someone wanted to kill the Gripen deal before it truly began. Yet the facts couldn't be buried. The F-35, despite its trillion-dollar budget, came with shackles. Its stealth was fragile, its repairs painfully slow, and its software completely controlled by the US. At any moment, Washington could decide the fate of Canadian aircraft. For a country that prided itself on independence, that was a terrifying realization. The Gripen, however, was the opposite. Cheap to maintain, able to launch from highways, and designed for rapid turnaround, it offered something priceless: freedom. It gave Canada the ability to stand on its own, to upgrade the jet without begging for US approval, to protect its skies without foreign permission. The more Canada studied it, the more dangerous the truth became. For Washington, the risk was enormous. If Canada, a NATO founder, chose the Gripen, the illusion of the F-35 as the only option could collapse worldwide. Others might follow. Billions in contracts, decades of dominance, all could vanish with one decision. That fear drove the pressure campaign into overdrive. American officials whispered of consequences. Intelligence cooperation could be reviewed. Defense ties might weaken. Trade deals were hinted to be at risk. It wasn't diplomacy anymore. It was blackmail. Meanwhile, Canadian pilots who tested the Gripen began to speak quietly of its strengths. They described how it slipped through radar screens, how its electronic warfare systems blinded enemies, how it outmaneuvered aircraft that were supposed to be untouchable. Some even called it the Ghost. And then, the leak happened. A confidential report comparing the Gripen and F-35 spilled into public view. Line by line, it showed Canada was now standing at the edge of a knife. Every corridor in Ottawa buzzed with tension. Every briefing felt like a battlefield. The Gripen deal had broken free of secrecy. It was now a storm Canada could not escape. With the leaked documents circulating in media, ordinary citizens began asking dangerous questions. Why should Canada spend billions on a jet that chained them to US control when a better, cheaper option stood before them? The Americans were furious. Officials arrived with smiles that hid threats. They warned that Canada could lose its privileged role in NORAD, that US technology sharing might be cut off. The pressure was no longer subtle. It was blunt, raw, and intimidating. But the more they pressed, the more some Canadian leaders grew defiant. "Are we a sovereign nation?" one minister reportedly said, "or just another state in the Union?" Behind closed doors, pilots continued their evaluations. They flew simulations, tested systems, and compared scenarios. Again and again, the Gripen astonished them. It jammed radars, slipped into enemy territory unnoticed, and engaged targets with deadly precision. Unlike the F-35, it didn't need a sprawling infrastructure to survive. It could be refueled on a road, serviced in minutes, and sent back into the fight. For the pilots who imagined combat over the Arctic, this meant survival. But survival came with risk. Rumors of espionage began to swirl. A Canadian officer claimed sensitive files vanished from a secure server. Another whispered of strange errors appearing in Gripen-related reports, as if someone was trying to sabotage the process from within. It became clear the battle was not just political, but shadowy, fought in the unseen world of intelligence. Meanwhile, Sweden's silence grew louder. They didn't threaten, didn't beg. Instead, they quietly offered Canada unprecedented cooperation, technology transfers, local production, true partnership. The message was subtle but clear. Canada would not be a customer. It would be an equal. As the final decision approached, the stakes could not have been higher. The day of the decision arrived. Ottawa was wrapped in silence. Yet the world's eyes burned with anticipation. Defense officials, lobbyists, journalists, and foreign spies all waited for the words that could tilt the balance of global power. Would Canada bend to Washington's will? Or would it break the chains? Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was suffocating. Ministers shifted nervously in their seats, the Prime Minister's face unreadable. Outside, cameras flashed as crowds gathered, chanting for independence. They wanted sovereignty, not subservience. And somewhere in the distance, American officials sat with cold stares, waiting to hear if their trillion-dollar F-35 empire had been wounded. The speech began slowly, cautiously. The Prime Minister spoke of Canada's proud history, its role in defending the Arctic, its need for reliable, cost-effective aircraft. Each sentence felt heavy, as though weighed against invisible threats. Then came the words that shattered the room. Canada has chosen the Saab Gripen. The silence that followed was thunderous. Then, an eruption. Gasps, gasps, applause, outrage, chaos filled the chamber. The Americans sat frozen, their faces pale. For decades, no major NATO nation had dared to step out of line. And now, Canada had just defied the world's most powerful defense machine. The fallout was immediate. Washington released a statement calling the decision disappointing. But behind closed doors, fury burned. Threats of economic retaliation circulated. Intelligence cooperation was suddenly under review, and whispers of diplomatic punishment spread. But it was too late. The decision had been made, and the message was clear. Canada's rebellion had lit a fuse. Across Europe, nations quietly drowning in F-35 expenses began to reconsider. Could the Gripen be their escape too? Could they also break free from dependence? The fear in Washington was not just about losing one contract. It was about losing control. That night, as Canadian pilots raised glasses